Rachel Madison. The prison guard entered the infirmary and closed the door behind him. Rachel smiled at him, and he looked away shyly. Rachel knew he liked her a little. Most of the guards liked her, if for no other reason than because there weren't many attractive women working at the Western Correctional Center. He cleared his throat. "I have a patient here for you," he said. Then his face took on a worried expression. "He's new downtown and has a reputation as a gangster. Would you like me to stay with him while you examine him?" he asked with some eagerness. Rachel smiled again. "Thank you, but that's not necessary. I know how to deal with people like him." "As you say, Nurse Madison," he said and walked away. A minute later he returned, this time accompanied by a Hispanic man in prison clothes who was holding a folder. "Sit down," the guard ordered roughly, "and don't give Nurse Madison any trouble, or you'll have to deal with me, you know." The prisoner ignored him, focusing his attention on the nurse in front of him. After the guard left, Rachel locked the door, then took the folder from the young man and quickly ran her eyes over it. "It says here that your name is Hector Hernandez and that you are 19 years old. Is that correct?" Hernandez looked at her long and slowly. "See, beauty." Rachel ignored his glare and impudence. "I'm Nurse Madison, and I'll be monitoring your health while you're at West Central." She began asking the young man a series of questions regarding his medical history. Hernandez mumbled his answers, clearly paying more attention to the nurse's figure than to her questions. "It says here that you have juvenile diabetes and that you take insulin every day. Is that correct, Hector?" When he nodded, she continued, "Okay, let's get on with it now." She walked over to the small refrigerator and returned with a syringe. "Please lift the bottom of your shirt so I can reach your waist." "See, Corson. Or I can take it off so you can see my whole chest." "That's not necessary," she said, and quickly injected him with insulin. As she disposed of the needle, she turned and crossed her arms, allowing her face to take on a stern expression. "Mr. Hernandez, you will have to change your attitude if you want to get along here in West Central. I am not your lover, I am a registered nurse. You will address me as Nurse Madison and show me respect in every way, understood?" He smiled at her cheekily. "You can take care of me, but I can take care of you even better if you let me. I'm very good at making girls happy, you know what I mean?" With these words, he stuck out his tongue and licked his lips juicily. To his surprise, the nurse gave him a tight-lipped smile. "Mr. Hernandez, I just gave you an insulin shot. Are you sure it was the right dosage? Are you sure it was insulin at all?" The smile disappeared from Hector's lips. "What happens the next time you have a headache and want an aspirin?" Rachel continued. "What if it's time for a flu shot? What if I don't get all the air out of the syringe? Do you know what happens when a big bubble of air gets into the heart?" The prisoner's expression darkened, and he took a step back from Rachel. Now the nurse was leaning towards him, her face contorted with anger and something else he couldn't understand. "I can ruin your life so quickly and in so many ways that you won't be able to imagine. So unless you want to become just another sad story about a prisoner who died here in prison, I suggest you treat me with complete respect." "Respect. Do you understand?" The young man did not look at her. "Si, Senora," he said. "In English," she demanded. "Yes," he said. "Yes, what?" she insisted. He looked at her in confusion, then lowered his head in realization. "Yes, ma'am. Yes, Nurse Madison." A triumphant smile lit up her face. "Well, Mr. Hernandez, now why don't you ask the guard to escort you back to your cell so I can do my paperwork?" When the guard came to pick up the prisoner, he stopped to ask, "Is everything okay, Nurse Madison?" She smiled sweetly at him. "Oh yes, he was a real gentleman. He did everything I wanted they always do." Tom Maddox. There was a noise outside his cubicle, and Tom automatically tensed as Harry Williams rushed inside. Tom hated the noise, he hated the interruptions, and most of all he hated Harry, who was everything that Tom was not. While Tom was quiet and thoughtful, Harry was an extrovert, reminding Tom of the proverbial bull in a china shop. While Tom was a team player who sought consensus, Harry was a natural leader whom others seemed to follow instinctively. And worst of all, while Harry's career seemed to be on the rise, Tom feared that his own had stalled and reached its peak. As Harry gabbed merrily about the latest office gossip, Tom felt like he was under siege, but there was no way to get the big talker out of his office without being rude, which Tom really didn't want to do. At that moment, Harry reached across the table and grabbed a framed photo of Cecily and Tom at their wedding reception. "Is it your wife?" Harry barked. "She's just a beauty. You definitely jumped over your head when you married her," he exclaimed. "Give it back," Tom shouted and snatched the frame from Harry's hands. "Leave it alone." Harry was so shocked by Tom's reaction that he stepped back and left the room, mumbling something about the meeting. Tom sat back down in his chair, still holding the wedding photo in his hands. He felt ashamed of his outburst, and worse, a pang of jealousy that shot through him, causing him to lose control. The truth was that deep down Tom felt that Harry was right. Cecilia really was too much for him. When he was honest with himself, he had to admit that he never expected her to accept his proposal. But she surprised him, and then he considered himself the happiest man in the world. He had never thought that the price for such an attractive wife was the constant gnawing fear he felt every time another man looked at her. He believed that his wife was faithful, but this did not help to get rid of attacks of jealousy. Sometimes he thought it would drive him crazy. Vincent Madison. Vince liked to think of his workday as having two halves, outside the office and in the office. In the morning, he roamed the halls of John F. Kennedy High School, greeting students at the door as they entered, entering classrooms to see and be seen, patrolling the hallways between classes to help maintain order, and even helping out in the cafeteria. He spent the second half of the day in his office. There he checked mail, did the inevitable paperwork, met with his parents, and held conferences with teachers or students as needed. He'd been following this routine since he arrived at John F. Kennedy High School, and it fit him like a glove. This also satisfied teachers and parents. They consistently gave Vince high marks in his grades. In fact, his grades were so good that there were rumors that Vince's next position could be a significant step up in educational administration. Midway through the Friday afternoon before spring break, he stepped out from behind the huge desk in his office and poked his head through the doorway. Noticing his secretary at the desk, he asked, "What else is on our schedule today, Mary?" The older woman pushed her papers aside to check her desk calendar. She refused to conduct meetings on the computer. "The rest of the day is pretty free. Your only meeting with Mrs. Maddox was when you asked her to come see you before she went home," the secretary reminded him. "Great," he said casually. "Look, Mary, if you want to leave a little early and start spring break, that's okay with me." "Thank you, Mr. Madison. I think I'll take advantage of that offer. I wanted to do my garden." Cecilia Maddox. Cecilia loved teaching 6th grade. Boys and girls were quickly approaching adolescence, but were still children in many ways. Most of them have not yet begun to acquire that gloomy mood that characterizes adolescent relationships with adults. On the contrary, they were full of enthusiasm and eager to learn, trying to please their teacher. Of course, she thought, some girls developed physically faster than others, and some boys were starting to notice. She had already sent notes to some parents' homes asking for bras for their daughters, and had to talk to one of her students privately about sitting more modestly at her desk when wearing a skirt. As usual, the boys in her class lagged behind the girls, especially in emotional development. But Cecilia always watched with interest how their attitude towards their classmates changed as the school year progressed. She was sure that many of them would invite the girls to the spring dance and not stand at the walls all evening. As she hurried down the hallway to Principal Madison's office, she felt a little nervous and thought that 6th graders weren't the only ones experiencing new and unexpected emotions. When she reached the principal's office, she noticed that Mr. Madison's secretary had already left. She heard him call her and motioned for her to come in. "Close the door, please, Mrs. Maddox," he said, and when she turned around after closing the door, he was standing right in front of her. Then his arms wrapped around her, holding her tightly to him, and his lips began to greedily devour her. After a few moments, his lips left her face and began peppering kisses along her ear, neck, and shoulder. Only then did she realize that she was breathing heavily. Finally, he pulled back to look at her. God, Cecilia, I thought this day would never end. He then started kissing her again until she realized she was losing control. Panicking, she pushed him away. No, Vince, stop. We can't do this here. There are still people in the building. Besides, we'll be at an educational conference together all next week. Reluctantly, he let go of her and stepped back, sitting on the edge of his desk. You're right, he said, but that doesn't make it any easier. I've been thinking about you since the last time. She blushed. I can't get you out of my head either. Then, as he moved toward her again, she quickly added, but we need to be patient and wait. If anyone here sees or hears anything, you know what it means. And what if it gets to Tom or Rachel? His face contorted at the mention of their spouses. Oh God, don't talk about it. It would be terrible. Then he shook his head, and his face took on a determined expression. Okay, I may be nice now, but that just means you're really in trouble when I get to you at the hotel for the conference. Cecilia felt excited. Still, she forced herself to maintain her composure. Now go home to your wife and be especially nice to her so that she doesn't suspect anything, she told him. Then a playful expression appeared on her face. Now here's something for you so you don't forget about me while you're with her. With that, she walked over and kissed him again, and this time it would have been clear to any observer that there was more than just attraction. Vince. When Vince walked into the living room on Saturday night, he noticed his wife looking out the window with her arms crossed. What's happened? He asked, but she did not answer. He walked up to her and asked, Is everything okay, Rachel? No, she answered with tears in her voice. What's happened? He asked with concern. What happened? She turned to him, and he saw that her eyes were red and puffy. This is my sister, she said in a trembling voice. She just called me, she's having a relapse. Vince mentally sighed and took his wife to the couch to calm her down. Rachel's sister was a lost soul, dropping out of college when her parents' marriage broke down and spiraling into depression, drugs, and alcohol. Rachel and Vince tried repeatedly to send her to rehab programs, but Megan did not complete any of them. It seemed that her parents' divorce had broken something in Megan that could not be repaired. For the past few years, she has been living on the streets. What does she want this time? He asked. Money, of course, Rachel said, lowering her head. You can't send her money, he said quickly. You know what the doctor said. I know we shouldn't encourage her, but it just breaks me to pieces when I hear the pain in her voice. I wish I could do something to help her. Vince hugged his wife. Of course, but nothing will help until she herself admits that she has a problem and is willing to do something about it. Suddenly, Rachel raised her head, her eyes filled with horror. You know what's the worst thing? I'm afraid that what's wrong with Megan is inside me too, just waiting for something to trigger it. No, Rachel, don't think like that. You're not like her. She has an illness, a mental illness you don't. You're a strong, capable woman. You need to remember that. His wife just sat there, crying quietly into her hands. Vince was desperate to find something that would take her mind off her sister's troubles. Listen, why don't we go somewhere for dinner? The weather is so nice, maybe we can find a place with a terrace. Rachel quickly shook her head. I'm not hungry, Vince. I think I'll just lie down. Will you take care of your own dinner? As she left the room, Vince shook his head in disappointment. He felt sorry for Megan, of course, but he believed that everything was already lost for her. However, she is everything she could still destroy her sister just with the sound of her voice. I wish there was some way I could keep her away from Rachel. Vince had mixed feelings as he thought about his prospects for the evening. He planned to make love to Rachel to calm her down before leaving for an educational congress tomorrow. But he knew that Rachel was now unlikely to get out of bed until the morning, and he also knew from past experience that when she did, she would be depressed. The good news for him was that he wouldn't feel so guilty pretending she was Cease while they made love. The bad news was that his session with Cease that day had really turned him on, and he was hoping for a little sexual relief. Damn, time to call Megan, he thought as he pulled out his cell phone to order takeout. Sissy, I really wish you wouldn't go to this convention, Tom said as Cease brushed her teeth. A whole week will pass, and you won't recognize anyone there. A finger of fear ran down her spine, and she hastily rinsed her mouth so that she could speak. We've talked about this over and over again, honey, she said soothingly. It's a great chance for me to meet a lot of people and learn what's going on in other school systems. This will be very useful for my professional development. I know, he whined, but a whole week. She adopted a tone of mock irritation. You travel all the time for work, honey. Yes, but it's not the same, and in any case, while you're gone, I'll be lonely. Cease knew he didn't want to admit that he was jealous of the men she would likely meet at the convention and how she might react to them. He won't have to worry about being seduced by some strange man, she thought to herself. But Cease didn't want Tom's jealous nature to get out of control, and she knew how to distract him. In a sultry tone, she asked, Are you really going to get lonely for me while I'm gone, baby? When he nodded, she slowly began to lift her nightgown, pulling it over her head until she stood in front of him in just her bikini panties. Is this going to make you lonely, baby? They had passionate sex. By the time she returned to bed, he was almost asleep with a smile on his lips. Mission accomplished, she thought with satisfaction as she turned off the light. When Cease woke up on Sunday morning, she rolled over to look at her bedside clock and saw that it was only 5:30 am. She wanted to sleep another hour, but she was too excited to go back to bed. Instead, she went downstairs and started preparing breakfast. She went ahead and ate hers, setting Tom aside to keep it warm. Her plan was to wait until he had breakfast and pack her bags. Earlier this week, she made a special purchase that she would rather Tom not see. The smell of bacon must have reached the second floor because Tom appeared at the door just as Cease was finishing her meal. You're up early, he remarked. You must be really, really excited to go to the convention. Inwardly, Cease groaned, hoping her husband wouldn't continue to complain, but outwardly, she smiled as she stood up to hug him. I really don't know why I woke up so early, baby. She gave him a knowing smile. Maybe it was that big vitamin injection you gave me last night. Tom clearly liked her answer, and his usual good mood returned when Cease rushed to serve him breakfast. She sat with him for a minute, finishing her coffee, then stood up casually. While I'm up, I might as well go and take a shower, she said casually, and then headed towards the stairs, trying not to rush. Once in the bedroom, she hurriedly gathered her bags, making sure to place her special purchase at the bottom of her makeup bag, where Tom would be unlikely to find it if he went looking. Once finished, she prepared a modest outfit to wear on the way to the convention. She wore granny panties and a heavy white bra over her skirt and blouse. That should calm his suspicions, she thought with satisfaction. When she finished packing, she slipped into the shower and dried herself thoroughly because she wanted to be completely clean for Vince. Coming out of the bathroom, she was not surprised to find that Tom had opened her suitcase and was rummaging through the contents. What are you doing? She asked sharply, although she knew the answer. Tom was embarrassed that he had been caught. Well, I just wanted to make sure you didn't forget anything, that's all. The lie seemed unconvincing even to him. Cease mentally praised herself for being careful to hide her surprise, but she didn't want to let her nosy husband get away with spying. Tom, to be honest, sometimes I don't know what to think of you. I've been packing my luggage since I was a teenager. I'm pretty sure I haven't forgotten how to do this. Now, if you'll stop groping through your underwear and give me some privacy, I'll get dressed. Horrified at being caught, Tom was glad to leave the crime scene and ran out the door. Cease had to cover her mouth to keep from laughing out loud at his embarrassment. Serves him right, she thought to herself as she returned to the bathroom to get her makeup bag. On the day it was time for her to leave, Tom made another half-hearted attempt to dissuade Cease. I really wish you wouldn't cease, he said, walking with her to the car. Sissy has no patience left. We've been through all this before, she told him sternly. Now kiss me and let me go on my way. He did this reluctantly. She got behind the wheel, rolled down the window, and shook her finger at him like a schoolteacher. Now you behave while I'm gone, Tom Maddox. No wild parties and wild women, you understand? He smiled weakly at her. You too, darling. Don't get into trouble there. She was laughing. Don't worry, there won't be anyone there except a bunch of teachers like me. With that, she pulled out of the driveway and headed toward the interstate as Tom waved goodbye to her. When his image disappeared from the rear view, Cecilia took her cell phone out of her purse. She didn't like texting while driving, but Tom didn't give her a moment's peace. Even now, she didn't dare stop to send Vince a message. It's just like Tom to make sure I'm going in the right direction. With that, she awkwardly typed a message to Vince with her right thumb, while trying to keep her eyes on the road. I'm on the road. I can't wait to see you in the room. Already wet. Hoping she wasn't mistaken, she pressed send and then turned off the phone. The last thing she wanted was for Tom to call her every 15 minutes during the trip. Volume. When his cell phone beeped indicating an incoming message, Tom smiled, confident that this was the last message from Cecilia. Indeed, his phone showed that the message was from her. But when he read what she sent, the message puzzled him. What does it mean, he thought. Why does she say she can't wait to see you when she just left? The last sentence made him gasp. Is she trying to have sex by correspondence? He was surprised. The phrase was so strange that for a second he wondered if someone else had sent him a message intended for another person. But his phone clearly showed that the message came from Cecilia. Then it dawned on him, could his wife have accidentally sent this message to someone else and chosen his name by mistake? But she doesn't know anyone at the conference except Vince Madison. Wait, Maddox is walking right in front of Madison, he said, horrified. What if Cecilia's message was intended for Madison? She's going there to spend a whole week with him, he thought with alarm, imagining the scenes of love pleasures between Cecilia and Vince. Stop, he ordered himself. You're jumping to conclusions. There must be a logical explanation. Surely Cecilia wouldn't be so careless as to accidentally send such a message to me. Maybe it's some kind of joke or a strange error from the telecom operator. You just need to call Cecilia and ask. He quickly dialed her number, but received an unavailable message. He left a voicemail asking him to call him back right away, but decided not to go into detail. I don't want to accuse her of cheating if it's just some stupid mistake. She's already mad at me for going through her suitcase. For the rest of the day, Tom unsuccessfully tried to call his wife, receiving the same message. By evening, it became clear to him that Cecilia had no intention of turning on her phone, which only exacerbated his paranoia. Finally, he made a decision that cut him like a harakiri blade. He began looking for detective agencies in the capital. If I don't hear from her by tomorrow morning, I'll have no choice but to take matters into my own hands. I can't go on like this. Vince. Vince had been waiting for several hours for Cecilia to arrive. He wasn't sure when she was expected to arrive, and not hearing from her only increased his impatience. He paced endlessly in the hotel lobby, turning his head every time the doors opened. It's stupid to worry so much. I'd better go back to my room and watch TV or something, he thought, starting another circle. It's even stupider to risk being noticed and arousing suspicion. If anyone finds out about my affair with one of my teachers, I can say goodbye to my career. Still, he couldn't bring himself to leave. He was desperate to see Cecilia as soon as she arrived. The truth was that he was madly in love with a young woman. He thought about her throughout the school day, and every sight of her gave him a thrill that he could not resist. He knew it was completely crazy to make love in his office, but they just couldn't control themselves. Instead of satisfying his desire, this episode only increased his need to be with her. Suddenly, he saw her pushing through the hotel doors, and he had to remind himself not to run as he approached her. After a casual conversation about her trip, he offered to help her carry her luggage to her room. There were other people in the elevator, so they had to keep their distance. One of them also got off on the same floor as Cecilia, so they maintained their decorum until Vince opened the door to her room and rolled her suitcases inside. But as soon as the door slammed behind them, he threw everything into a pile, picked her up, and began kissing her as if it was his last day of life. Cecilia was no less greedy. She hugged him, wrapping her arms and legs around him, trying to get as close to his body as possible. After a few minutes, he pulled away from her to begin tearing off her clothes and undoing her buttons. "Stop, stop," she said in panic. "Whatever you do, don't tear anything." She quickly moved away and began to undress herself. Seeing what she was doing, Vince began to do the same. When Cecilia took off her skirt, the phone fell out of her pocket and landed face down on the carpet. As she reached to pick it up, she remembered that she hadn't turned it on. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Vince reaching out to her and realized that if she didn't check her messages now, she wouldn't have another chance until tomorrow. "Vince, wait. Let me make sure Tom didn't call about some kind of emergency. Just give me a minute." When her phone turned on, Vince sighed and reluctantly took a step back. "It's only a minute," he thought impatiently. When Cecilia saw the missed call indicator, she quickly checked the list. Her face took on an expression of disgust, and she showed the phone to Vince. "Look at this," she said indignantly. "He's been trying to call me all day and started just minutes after I left. This man is so insecure," she added, completely oblivious to the irony. Before Vince could approach her, Cecilia suddenly sat down on the bed with a sad expression on her face. "He really needs me," she sighed. She then looked at Vince, who sat down next to her. "Vince, I'm not sure this is a good idea. Tom really loves me, even if he's so needy. I really feel bad for cheating on him. What about Rachel?" Tom's face also darkened. "I know you're right. Rachel can be in a bad mood, but she always comes out of it. I don't want to hurt her or Tom. It's just so hard, feeling the way I feel about you." "I know, and I feel the same about you. But that doesn't give us the right to do it knowing how much it hurts them. I think we need to stop now before we cause more damage than we already have." He looked at her sadly. "I suppose that's the best thing if you really mean it, Cecilia." She smiled slightly at him. "Thank you for your understanding, Vince. You truly are a special person." She reached out and gently stroked his cheek. He took her hand, kissed it, and, looking into her eyes, said softly, "Oh, Cecilia," and suddenly pulled her towards him, kissing her on the lips with all the passion that had accumulated in his body. Cecilia gasped, and her body seemed to lose all strength as she fell onto the bed. A second later, Vince was on top of her, and she was hugging him, breathless. "With all my might." take me," she gasped, and he quickly tore off her underwear. It was at that moment that her phone rang. "No," cried Cecilia, "not now." Vince quickly reached over and turned off the phone. He threw it aside and returned to his mistress. Cecilia hugged him with her arms and legs as tightly as she could. When both came to their senses, it became obvious that there would be no more talk about ending their romance. Volume. On Monday, Tom was deliberately late for work because he didn't want to make a phone call without someone hearing him. When he got through to the detective agency, the operative listened to Tom's problem and wrote down all the important details. "Is she at a teacher's conference? It's not a problem for us," the woman said. "But it may take a day or two to give you the results. We already have 3 other cases at the same conference." Knowing that he was not the only potential cuckold at the conference did not bring Tom any comfort. When he finished the call, he sat back in his chair. Now the decision has been made. It was a relief to finally know what was really going on with Cecilia, but Tom knew that the truth would likely lead his life into a downward spiral of pain, shame, and ridicule. Already now he felt a wave of anger growing inside him. Cecilia didn't call Tom back on Monday or Tuesday, which was both a relief and a pain. Now that he had hired a detective agency, he really didn't want to talk to her until he knew where things stood. But on the few occasions when she traveled without him, it was her custom to call him every evening, so her silence now only added to his irritation. All he could do was keep telling himself not to think about it, which only made him more anxious. If I don't hear something soon, he told himself during one of his increasingly frequent internal monologues, I'm going to go crazy. Late Wednesday evening, Tom received a call on his cell phone from an unknown number. He quickly walked into a small conference room that was not in use and closed the door. As he suspected, it was a woman from a detective agency. Sorry it took us so long to get back to you, she said, but as I mentioned, we do have a lot to do. Then her voice changed. I am also very sorry to inform you that we have confirmed your suspicions about your wife. We were able to install a small camera in your wife's hotel room, and we have photographic evidence to confirm your fears. I have already sent the file to the email address you gave us with a copy of this evidence. She paused, but Tom remained silent. Mr. Maddox, would you like us to continue surveillance or perform any other service for you? She asked quietly. No, thank you, he said. That's all I need. Just send me the bill. The woman cleared her throat and then asked, Mr. Maddox, what are your plans now? Don't know. Mr. Maddox, in our experience, the last thing a person in your situation should do is act hastily. Please do not do anything that you may later regret. I should also tell you that many couples we have worked with were able to overcome this experience and continue to build their marriages. Tom's voice was tense. Thank you for your advice and for your services. He ended the conversation. As he did this, his emotions began to rise like a wave, and suddenly he began to cry. Cursing himself for his weakness, he put his head in his hands, and his tears soaked the sleeve of his shirt. A few minutes later, he heard a noise outside, and the thought of being discovered was strong enough to stop his sobs. He did his best to dry his eyes, then stood up and walked to the door to look out. Making sure that no one was around, he hurried to the men's room and washed his face with cold water. Having done everything he could, he hurried towards his office, only to run into an acquaintance in the hallway. Is everything okay, Tom? Asked the man. You don't look good. I think I'm starting to get sick, Tom lied. I'll go home so as not to infect others. The man quickly took a step back, and Tom took the opportunity to hurry to his booth. He quickly turned off the computer, put away the papers, and headed to his car. At home, Tom headed to his home computer and, with trembling fingers, checked his email. A message from the detective agency was waiting for him, and he opened the attached file with a sinking heart. It only took a few images to confirm Tom's worst fears, and suddenly his stomach rebelled. Rushing into the bathroom, he barely had time before throwing up everything he'd eaten for lunch into the toilet. When he finally finished, Tom lay down on the floor, too weak to move. After a long time, he stood up and returned to the living room, where he lay down on the sofa and closed his eyes. The darkness only intensified his memories of the images he saw, images of his marriage ending in that hotel room. He finally forced himself to sit up, trying to decide what to do next. It's probably a good thing Cecilia isn't here right now, he thought, because if she was, I don't know what I could do to her and my so-called friend Vince Madison. But it reminded him that he was not the only one affected. Poor Rachel, he thought. She always seemed so crazy about Vince. It'll probably kill her when she finds out. The more he thought about it, the more he became convinced that he had to tell Rachel. I bet Vince has been deceiving her for a long time. Either way, I wish she would have told me if she was the one who discovered it, he said to himself. But the truth was that he was secretly gleeful at the thought of what Rachel would do to Vince when she found out the truth. He deserves everything he gets and more, he thought with satisfaction. Quickly, Tom printed out a set of photographs. When he finished, he found the Madison's phone number and called. He expected Rachel to still be at work, so he was surprised when she answered. However, he told her that he needed to come talk to her about something important. She hesitated a little, but finally agreed to accept it. When he arrived, Rachel met him at the door and invited him inside. You've certainly intrigued me, Tom. What's so important that it needs to be said in person? She asked. Now that he was face to face with Rachel, Tom began to doubt what he was doing. She and Cecilia had dinner with the Madisons at each other's homes several times, but he didn't know them well, and he had no idea how Rachel would react. Now that he was in front of her, he couldn't think of a way to avoid the topic he'd come for, so he got down to business. Rachel, I don't know how to make this any easier, so I'll just say it straight. My wife and your husband are having an affair. Rachel's pupils dilated slightly as she looked at Tom, but she didn't react any further. Thinking that she didn't believe him, Tom took the photographs out of the envelope and showed them to her. I hired a detective agency to follow them at the conference. He began, but suddenly Rachel started screaming. No, no, this can't be. Oh God, my life is over. With these words, she collapsed on the floor and began to sob hysterically. Tom was shocked. He never expected such a reaction. Rachel, Rachel, he said worriedly, kneeling next to her. It's okay, we'll figure it out. There's nothing to figure out, she sobbed. I'm a dead man walking. No, no, don't say that, Tom convinced her. We will find a way out. You will see. You don't understand, she said through tears. When I was growing up, my father cheated on my mother. He ran away with another woman. My mother loved him so much that it destroyed her. She went to his room, found his gun, and shot herself. Oh God, I didn't know. I'm so sorry, Rachel, Tom said, feeling sick that he had forced Rachel to relive that terrible time. You don't understand, Tom. Mom was happy. When Dad left, it drove my sister Megan crazy. She ran away from home and started living on the streets, having sex for money to survive. Since then, she has been in and out of rehab in psychiatric institutions. Rachel's voice stabilized briefly, but now it began to rise again. And now the same thing will happen to me. I'll end up like Megan. Oh God, this is terrible, Rachel. But just because your sister had it so bad doesn't mean the same thing will happen to you. I'll help you, You, Rachel screamed. It's all your fault. Tom recoiled in surprise. Me, but I didn't do anything, he protested. That's right, you didn't do anything. If you had kept your bitch in line, none of this would have happened. Wait a minute, Rachel. Cease not a bitch. Are you protecting her? Rachel asked incredulously. Yes, I mean no I. You are pathetic, Rachel shouted at him. Bet everyone at your job is laughing at you behind your back. Before I'm done, the whole town will know what a pathetic cuckold you are. You won't dare show your face. You'll die a living death, too. Her venom and anger struck straight to the heart of Tom's inferiority complexes, and he recoiled as if she had struck him with a club. You're crazy. It's not my fault. It's your husband who started all this, he shouted in defense. She started laughing so hard that Tom got scared. Oh my God, she's really crazy, he thought. Nobody knows what she can do. Hastily, he grabbed the photographs and stepped away from her until he reached the front door. He then turned around and ran to his car. As he drove away, he thought he could still hear Rachel laughing. When he returned home, Tom was deeply shocked by Rachel's reaction. I knew she'd be upset, but I never thought she'd snap like that. Who knows what she might do now? A terrible thought struck him. What if she knows someone from my office? If she starts spreading rumors, I'll never be able to work there again. He imagined how the unpleasant Harry Williams would react to this. He will never let me forget this, thought Tom. I have to do something, but what? He finally decided it was best to try to contact Cease and Vince and get them back as soon as possible. She's his wife, it's his job to deal with her. And if she goes crazy on him, well, he deserves it. He picked up his cell phone and dialed Sissy's number again, only to receive a message that the number was out of service. He waited impatiently for the voicemail to come on, then left an angry message. Cease, you and Vince better come home right now if you don't want any more problems than you already have. I have pictures of you too, and so does Rachel. Knows. Call me back and let me know you got this message, you cheating bitch. When he finished, he went to the bar, grabbed a whiskey, and returned to the couch. Drinking from the bottle, his thoughts returned again and again to his meeting with Rachel. The more he thought about it, the more afraid he was of what kind of revenge she might wreak on him. And I didn't do anything, he thought pitifully. The next morning, waking up with a huge hangover, he decided to call work and say that he was sick. But then he began to worry that someone might have overheard him in the conference room. I have to go to work to show everyone that I'm okay, he thought. After a shower and a breakfast that consisted mostly of aspirin, he somehow managed to get to work. He was relieved to find that no one had treated him differently, but that relief was overshadowed by Cease's failure to call back. He wished he had Vince's number, but the only way to get it was to call Rachel, and that was something he had to avoid at all costs. He thought about calling the congressional office, but didn't want to risk starting rumors by leaving an urgent message. He felt cornered. When he returned home in the evening, he found that he had left the house in disarray. There were pillows on the floor, clothes scattered all over the furniture, and he tripped over a bottle of whiskey as he started to clean up. He even left the kitchen door unlocked when he left in the morning. I didn't notice it when I left. I must have still been a little drunk, he thought sadly. He started to clean the house, but stopped to call Cease again. When it got to her voicemail again, he hung up angrily. She's clearly ignoring me, he thought. Well, it doesn't matter if she goes home now or fucks him for the rest of the convention. All she's doing is delaying the inevitable. Either way, I'll call the lawyer tomorrow. Sissy. Cease was almost embarrassed. It's a good thing I don't know anyone here at the convention, she thought. The way I was hanging on Vince would have made anyone realize there was something going on between us. In fact, many noticed the obvious emotion flowing between them, and several people commented on what a cute couple they make. Cease wavered between anxiety and excitement as she clung to her handsome lover's hand. I wish we didn't have to go home at the end of the week, she whispered to him several times. On Thursday night, one of the major textbook publishing companies held a dinner dance for the members, and Cease and Vince enjoyed it, dancing until they were too tired to continue, and then returning to their table for more free cocktails. By the time the event was over, both were more than a little drunk, which made them even more in love when they returned to Cease's room. But when Vince reached out to her, Cease clumsily dodged his hands. "Wait, Tom," she said, breathless. "I saved something special for you. Let me change." While he was lying on the bed, she went into the bathroom, taking her cosmetic bag with her. She had been saving a negligee set that she bought at Victoria's Secret, and now was the perfect time to wear it. The top was transparent and black with red decorations on the chest. The panties were just a thong made of sheer black lace. She was going to take off her heels, but at the last minute she decided to leave them on because they made her calves look so beautiful. As she finished, she noticed that her purse had tipped over and her cell phone had fallen out. When she picked it up, she was shocked to see that it was turned off. "Oh my God," she thought, "it's been off the whole time I've been here. I was having such a good time that I didn't even think about it." She quickly turned on the phone and felt a wave of guilt when I saw all the missed calls from Tom. I better check in case it's an emergency. When she heard his last message, she screamed. "Are you okay there, sissy?" Vince asked worriedly. In response, Cease opened the bathroom door and silently handed Vince her phone so he could hear the message. Tom's eyes widened. "Oh shit," he exclaimed. "We're in big trouble." Cease fell on the bed and started crying. "I never thought he would find out," she sobbed. "We need to get home now, Vince." He pulled her close to him. "I think you're right, honey, but we'll have to wait until the morning with how much we've drunk. Neither of us should be driving today." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You're right, but I feel so bad about this." "I know, darling, I know," he reassured her, kissing her hair. After a minute or two, his kisses traveled down her neck to her ear and shoulder. Suddenly, she sat up abruptly and pushed him away. "What are you doing, Vince?" she demanded. "Look, honey, we're stuck here for the night, and we can't do anything until tomorrow. Besides, you look damn hot, and this might be the last chance we have for a while." "I cannot believe it," she said angrily. Our marriages are probably over, our jobs are on the line, and all you think about is sex. I just don't want to miss any opportunity to be together, honey, that's all. Well, you don't stand a chance tonight, Mr. I'm sleeping in the other bed, and don't you dare sneak up on me in the middle of the night. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Vince. It wasn't until early Thursday afternoon that Vince and Cease were finally able to begin their trip home. They both slept much longer than they had planned, and when they woke up, they were both hungover. Strong coffee and a light breakfast helped, then they both had to pack their things and check out before finally hitting the road. In daylight, the magnitude of their problem was fully realized. They chose to order breakfast to their room because Cease couldn't stop crying and didn't want others to see her. In addition to the certainty that her marriage was over, Cease was overwhelmed with guilt for the pain that her betrayal caused Tom. She also understood that her husband would suffer humiliation among his colleagues and friends. No matter what happens, we have to try to keep it a secret for his sake as well as for ours, she told Vince. Vince did his best to calm her down. Tom loves you, he repeated over and over. It will be hard, but he will forgive you. And even if he doesn't, he can save face by filing for divorce due to irreconcilable differences and not because of infidelity. Cease knew Vince was right, but the thought of divorce brought tears to her eyes again. When she finally calmed down a little, she raised her head and asked, "What about Rachel? How will she take it?" Vince looked at her sadly. It will be very, very difficult for her. Her parents' divorce left deep scars. Then his face brightened a little. But maybe this is a positive thing. If we get through the initial pain, maybe what happened to her parents will convince Rachel not to ask for a divorce. Then his mood became deeply serious. I know it's best for Tom and Rachel if we can avoid divorce. And frankly, it will be much better for your career and mine. But the fact is, I don't want to break up with you. He took Cease's hands and asked, "What do you think about this?" She looked at him intently, then lowered her eyes. Don't make me answer that question. This is all such a mess, and I don't know what's going to happen to any of us. All I know is that we have to go home and start figuring this out. As they rolled their suitcases into the parking lot, Vince walked up to Cease's car and said, "I'll follow you to your house, honey." She looked at him with concern. "You can't do this, Vince. It will only make Tom angrier." "I don't care," he said stubbornly. "I want to make sure he doesn't hurt you. If he wants to hit me, that's okay, I deserve it. But I won't let him touch you." Nothing she could say could convince him otherwise, so she headed home anxiously, with Vince right behind her. Volume. Tom went to work this morning, but when he received a text from Cease around noon that she was on the way, he took the rest of the day off to go home and wait for her return. With each passing hour, he became more and more agitated. What the hell is keeping her so long? He was angry. Did she stop along the way to sleep with Vince again? As a result, he was in an extremely emotional state when he saw Cease's car finally drive into the driveway. And when he saw Vince pull up to pick her up, he was beside himself. He threw the front door and shouted, "What is he doing here?" Instead of answering, Vince simply took Cease's bags and walked with her to the door. "Look, Tom, I know you're mad at me, and you have every right to be. But I owe it to you to face you like a man, and I owe it to Cease to make sure she doesn't get hurt because what I've done." Tom just looked at him, so upset that he couldn't think of anything to say. Finally, he remembered what their stage looked like in public and stepped back from the door. Cautiously, Vince and Cease walked in and sat down in the living room. Tom had spent the entire day rehearsing what he wanted to say to Cease, but now that she was here with Vince, he couldn't remember a word of what he had planned. Before he could begin, Cease spoke, tears already beginning to roll down her cheeks. "Tom, I'm so sorry for what we did to you. I never meant to hurt you. The truth is, I never believed you would find out." Tom looked at her angrily. "And what exactly did you do that you're so sorry for? Oh, maybe it's this." And with that, he threw the photographs from the detective agency onto the coffee table in front of Cease and Vince. Vince turned pale and Cease began to sob. Tom felt some satisfaction from the couple's obvious distress, but his triumph was short-lived. Vince suddenly spoke. "Have you shown these photographs to anyone else, Tom?" Tom considered contacting a lawyer and using the photographs as evidence, but the thought of revealing his shame to another person made him hesitate. Tom now felt protected and blurted out, "No, but I'm going to. I just wanted to hear what the bitch had to say in her defense." Even Tom himself found it weak. Now Vince saw an opportunity. "Look, Tom, don't do anything hasty. Cease loves you. She doesn't want to lose you. I was the bad guy in all this. I was the one who seduced her. Everyone at these conventions goes crazy, and in this environment, I took advantage of her weakness. If you forgive her and bring her back, you will have the most loving and faithful wife a man can have. I promise you that. Be mad at me, but show Sissy that you still love her." Tom was taken by surprise. Part of him really wanted to take Vince's advice, because then there would be no exposure, no humiliation. But his emotions from this week were still raw, and he found it difficult to dismiss them so easily. "You want me to just forget about those photos, forget about what you two have been doing all week?" he asked in disbelief. "I know this is a deep wound, and it will take a long time for it to fully heal. But love is the only thing that can heal such a wound, and I think you both still love each other very much," Vince said. As he spoke, Sissy looked at him with surprise and admiration. She never expected Vince to sacrifice himself for her like that, and she was full of gratitude and something else. Tom was also surprised by Vince's words, and now a new rationalization filled his mind. It's not Cease's fault. She was seduced by Vince. She was weak, but she understood her lesson. If they go to counseling and figure it out, everything will go back to normal, and no one will ever know. These thoughts flashed through his head, and he slowly turned to Sissy. "Do you really feel that way, Cease? Do you promise to be faithful from now on and go to counseling to work on our marriage? Do you promise to never see Vince again?" At the last words, Cease suddenly glanced at Vince and then lowered her eyes, unable to look at her husband. Tom understood this instantly. "Oh God, he almost deceived me. You don't love me, you're in love with Vince. That's it, At that moment, the doorbell rang and Tom's head turned sharply towards the door. "Who could it be?" he asked. The doorbell rang again insistently, and Tom went to shoo away the visitor. But when he opened the door, Rachel burst into the room, almost knocking Tom over. All three stared at her in shock. Instead of the attractive and well-groomed woman they all knew, standing in front of them was a witch with disheveled hair, unkempt clothes, and a wild expression on her face. "I thought I would find you three conspiring against me," she shouted. "You're all in this together." Sissy was the first to come to her senses. "No, Rachel, you got it all wrong. Vince and I came here to confess to Tom and ask for forgiveness. Then we were going to come to you." "You are lying," Rachel screamed. "You're just trash who spread her legs in front of my husband, and who knows how many others." Suddenly, to their amazement, she rushed at Sissy and punched her in the cheek, knocking the stunned woman to the floor. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Vince grabbed his wife's hands and pulled her away from Cease's prone figure. Rachel screamed and started trying to hit and scratch her husband. As he held her hands tightly, she kicked him in the shin, causing him to collapse to the floor in pain. Rachel stood over him, shouting insults. "Do you know what you did to me? I told you what happened to my mother and my sister, and you still cheated on me. But don't think that you and your bitch will escape this. Before I'm done, you'll both be fired from the education sector. Everyone will know about this. Everyone will see these photographs." Tom was too stunned to act, but Rachel's threat to make the photos public spurred him into action. "Rachel," he said soothingly, "let's talk about this. You," Rachel shouted at him. "If you had kept your bitch on a leash when she was in heat, she wouldn't have gone to my husband. But I guess you just weren't man enough to satisfy her. But don't worry about me. When I'm done, all the city will laugh at you. When they go to Google to look up cuckold, your face will be the first thing they see." She grinned mockingly. She stepped back and placed her hands on her hips, turning around to look at all three of them. I'm going home to get some rest. I'll need it because I have a big day ahead of me. Careers to destroy, reputations to ruin, good names to smear. She turned to Vince. And don't even think about coming home, dear husband. If you do, I'll call the police so fast your head will spin. She then turned on her heel and walked out of the room, slamming the front door. The three remaining people were so stunned that they temporarily forgot about their own problems. "Oh God, what was that?" Sissy whispered, hardly believing. "I thought she was going to kill me." "She'll kill us all, one way or another, if we don't stop her," Tom said. Turning to Vince, he said in an accusing tone, "This is your wife, can't you do anything with her?" In some ways, Vince was more shocked than any of them. "You don't understand. I've never seen anything like this before. I knew her history with her parents, but she never acted like this. I think she was having some kind of psychotic episode." "Well, maybe you haven't seen it before, but that's what she was like when I told her about you and Cease earlier this week," Tom said darkly. "Did you tell her about us?" Vince shouted. "Why the hell did you do that?" Tom's anger returned with renewed vigor. "Well, why the hell did you cheat on my wife, you bastard?" Tempers flared up again, and finally Tom barked, "I want you both out of my house right now. Vince, I don't care where you go, and you Cease." Then he paused and thought about what was going to say. "No, I don't want you two meeting at some motel. Cease, you stay here tonight, I'll find a place to stay, and tomorrow we'll work it out. Vince, I better not hear that you tried to sneak in here, otherwise you won't be happy." With that, the three of them went their separate ways, each in shock, each wondering what tomorrow would bring. Rachel. Exhausted after her breakdown at Tom Maddox's house, Rachel returned home and soon fell asleep on the couch. Later that night, she was awakened by the sound of footsteps on the porch. Vince must be trying to get in, she thought, her anger flaring again. She hurried to the front door and opened it. In the dim light of the lantern, the only thing she saw clearly was the barrel of the machine gun pointed at her. "About," she said, and then a 9mm bullet killed her. She didn't feel it, just as she didn't feel the next 3 bullets fired at her. Detectives Harry Bridgewater and Tess Mosley. The rookie patrolman felt a little nauseous when he first saw Rachel Madison's body, but he was well enough recovered by the time the lab team arrived. He heard a car pull up across the street and saw a man and woman get out. The trooper said they appeared to be arguing. The patrolman turned to his sergeant, who waved his hand towards the approaching couple. "Who are they?" he asked curiously. The sergeant laughed. "They're detectives Bridgewater and Mosley, but we just call them the odd couple." "Why the odd couple?" "Because they always argue like an old married couple," the sergeant chuckled. "What's funny is that they're not married, they just fight, it seems. But they're still a good team and have solved a lot of cases over the last few years." At that moment, Harry and Tess walked up onto the porch. "Sergeant, it's a little early for this call," Harry said. "What do we have here?" The sergeant took out his notepad. According to the driver's license found inside, the victim is a 36-year-old woman named Rachel Madison. The lab guys say she was killed around 2 and the cause of death was a bullet to the brain, but to make sure, the gunman shot her 3 more times. Twice in the chest and once in the pelvic area. The detectives exchanged glances. "Crime of passion," Tess muttered. "The lab guys didn't find any fingerprints or other obvious evidence, but they want to double-check everything just to be sure," said Sergeant. "Is anything missing, money or valuables?" asked Harry. "If this is a crime of passion, then it's not lost," Tess intervened, and Harry shot her a displeased look. "Maybe, but you always have to ask," he said, rolling his eyes. The sergeant suppressed his laughter. "No, the contents of her wallet were dumped on the couch, but nothing was missing. We found a couple $100 in her wallet." "Did anyone hear or see anything?" Harry continued. "The neighbor who called the police said he heard a noise, but thought it was children setting off fireworks." "Where was Mr. Madison?" asked Tess. Harry turned to her with annoyance. I was just about to ask about that. She ignored him and raised her eyebrows questioningly at the sergeant. He was nowhere to be found. Judging by the state of the house, he hasn't been there for a few days. Maybe he went on a business trip or something. Check her cell phone, Harry said. Probably his number is there. We will as soon as we finish checking the phone for other evidence, the sergeant said. Now Tess rolled her eyes. Nothing can be done until the labs are finished, she said irritably. After the two of them examined the crime scene, they returned to the car. There's no point in going home, Harry said. It's already dawn. Let's stop at IHOP and get something to eat. Tess looked at him with irritation. You eat too much junk food, Harry. It's bad for your heart. Let's go somewhere where we can order something healthy. He sighed heavily. Yes, Mommy, he said sarcastically. Whatever you say. Tess giggled. They finished breakfast in a small cafe, and over cups of black coffee and oatmeal, they discussed the matter. Her husband killed her, Harry said decisively. How can you say that? Tess asked in disbelief. Dead wife plus missing husband plus crime of passion equals guilty husband. QID. Tess shook her head. First of all, you haven't spoken to any witnesses or suspects, so you can't come to that conclusion. Secondly, it's QED quod erat demonstrandum. It's Latin, you idiot. It's all Greek to me, Harry joked, pleased with his joke. But no matter how you say it, I'm sure you're right. You may be right, said Tess, but I'll bet you that you're wrong. They were finishing their second cup of coffee when Harry received a call. After the conversation, he turned to Tess with a satisfied smile. We found Vince Madison. He's staying at a Super 8 motel just off the highway. Let's go. A patrolman was standing at the door of one of the rooms on the first floor when Harry and Tess arrived. I guess they didn't want the culprit to get away, Harry said sarcastically. Tess ignored him and went to the door and knocked. When the man opened, she introduced them and said they needed to ask a few questions about his wife. Inside, the two detectives took their places, Harry asking questions and Tess watching. Over the years, they had learned that she had a better understanding of suspects than Harry. Mr. Madison, where were you from midnight until morning? I was here, Vince said a little defensively. I had dinner and then checked in here between 8 and 9 p.m. The waitress at the front desk can be more precise. Anyway, I watched a little TV and went to bed. I slept until your officer woke me up. Harry made a note in his notebook. Did anyone see you after you checked into the motel? Can anyone confirm that you were here all night? The man shook his head irritably. If you're asking if I was with someone, the answer is no. I was alone all night. And you didn't go outside after you moved in? I told you I didn't go out, detective. Aha. So why did you spend the night in a motel instead of at home with your wife? Tess noticed how worried Vince was. Well, to tell you the truth, Rachel and I had a little fight, and I thought it would be best if I walked away and let her cool off. I was going to come back today and try to work things out. Of course now. What were you fighting about? We didn't fight, we had a little disagreement. About what? I had to go to an educational conference in the capital. Rachel wanted me to come back early, and when I couldn't, she was a little upset. Did you hit her? What? No, of course not. Did she hit you? Tess noticed that he hesitated for a split second. No, it was an argument, not a fight. So let me get this straight. You returned from a conference yesterday, and when you got home, you and your wife were having an argument. Now Vince was clearly uncomfortable. No, not really. One of the teachers from our school, Mrs. Maddox, was also at the conference, and I followed her home to make sure she got there safely. Tom and Cease Maddox are our friends, so I stopped by for a minute. So you spoke briefly with the Maddoxes before you went home, where you had an argument with your wife, correct? No, Rachel actually went to Tom and Cease's house, and the argument happened there. It was pretty awkward. So after the argument, you went out to dinner, and then checked into a motel, right? Exactly, Vince said, his relief evident. Okay, just two final questions for now. How would you characterize your marriage to Mrs. Madison? Vince fidgeted in chair. Obviously, we had our ups and downs, but overall, I would say it was a normal marriage. Harry nodded in understanding. Do you have a weapon, Mr. Madison? No, Vince said sharply. Okay, said Harry, that's all for now. But don't leave town without letting us know in case we have any more questions. With these words, he and Tess stood up and headed towards the exit. Oh, and sorry for your loss, Mr. Madison. Vince nodded. Harry started the engine and pulled out of the motel parking lot. He lied like clockwork, he said smugly. I don't think he was lying, but rather he wasn't telling us everything he knew, Tess said. He was definitely trying to hide something. Yeah, like he shot his wife, Harry chuckled. I can already imagine that dinner. Tess ignored him. Where are we passing now? Let's stop by for some more coffee, and then we'll go see if Mr. and Mrs. Maddox are home, he replied. Vince. As soon as the police left, Vince grabbed his cell phone and called Cease. When she heard his voice, she immediately exclaimed, Oh, Vince, I just heard the news about Rachel. She was about to continue, but he interrupted her. Look, I can't talk about this right now. The police were just here and asked a bunch of questions. They know Rachel came to your house yesterday, and I told them we had an argument, but that's it. Now they're probably already on their way to talk to you and Tom. If you don't want everything about us to become known to everyone, you better persuade Tom to return home as quickly as possible and convince him to cooperate. He heard the panic in Sissy's voice. How can I do this? Tom hates me, he doesn't care if I lose my job or not. I know, Cease, but the last thing he wants is for everyone to start laughing at him and calling him a cuckold, Vince said. He's got as much on the line as we do. You can play on that. He heard her take a deep breath. I'll try, Vince, but I can't promise anything. Just do the best you can, he said desperately. Vince, Cease asked uncertainty, did you kill Rachel? No, Vince exploded. Of course not. I could never do that. I thought so, but she was so cruel to you that I just wondered. Put that thought out of your head and focus on convincing Tom to play by our rules. Remember, he has as much at stake as we do. Harry and Tess. When Harry and Tess knocked on the door of the Maddox house, Tom and Cease greeted them. After exchanging pleasantries, Harry opened his notebook. I understand that you were friends with the Madisons. How would you characterize their relationship with each other? Tom and Cease exchanged glances, and Tom spoke first. Pretty normal, I'd say. They had their differences, like most married couples, but nothing out of the ordinary. I heard they had quite a heated argument at your house yesterday afternoon. Did you see that argument? Tess noticed that Tom looked and sounded very nervous. Aha, he said simply. What were they arguing about? Seeing Tom hesitate, Cease quickly intervened. It was nothing serious. The educational conference had been going on all week, and I think Rachel was missing Vince. Anyway, they started arguing, and the argument got a little heated. Harry checked his notes, then looked at Cease. Was Rachel here when you and Mr. Madison returned from the conference? No, said Tom. She came a little later. Why did she come here? How did she know Mrs. Maddox and Mr. Madison were here? Did you call her? No, said Tom, clearly uncomfortable, I think. Cease quickly chimed in. I think she came here to see if Vince and I were there. Like I said, she missed him. Harry nodded and turned back to his notepad as the pair waited tensely. He looked up and asked, after their argument, did Mr. and Mrs. Madison leave together? Tom could answer this question. No, they each left in their own cars. Harry nodded. Of course. So after they left, you two were here all night together. Tom and Cease exchanged quick glances. It was Sissy who spoke. Actually, no. I'm afraid Tom and I had a little fight after they left too, and Tom spent the night in a motel. Harry's eyebrows rose. So basically, neither of you can confirm the location of the other at the time of the murder, right? Tom and Cease looked at each other in surprise again, and Tess wasn't sure what had passed between them. Finally, Tom said, "No, but I don't see how it matters. Neither of us had anything to do with what happened to poor Rachel." To Tess's surprise, Harry stood up and put the notebook away. "Okay, I think that's all for today. If we need any more information, we will contact you." With that, he headed for the door, followed reluctantly by Tess. When they were back outside, Tess turned to her partner and exclaimed, "Are you crazy, Harry?" They were both nervous, as if they were in the electric chair. There were a lot of questions you had to ask them. Harry gave her a smug look. "You think I don't understand this, Miss Smart? It was obvious that they conspired before our visit. I want them to feel that they deceived us, and then I will bring them in for questioning separately. I think we will hear a completely different story when one cannot cover the other." Tess looked at him doubtfully. "Maybe, but I think if we push them a little harder, now we'd get the same results." "Just wait and see," Harry said confidently. Volume. Tom walked up and down the living room. "This will never work," he complained. "They'll see right through this pathetic story, and we'll be in big trouble." "No, they won't," Sissy snapped. "They believed it today, we just have to stick with it." "I don't understand why you're trying so hard to protect Vince when it's obvious he shot Rachel." "No, I didn't shoot you," Cease said sharply, although her anxiety was increasing. "Vince would never do something like that." "Well, if he didn't kill her, maybe you did," Tom blurted out, hurt by how protective Cease was of her lover. Sissy was shocked. "I can't believe you said that, Tom." Then a terrible thought struck her, and she said it without thinking. "In fact, maybe it was you who shot her. I know how much you value your reputation." To her surprise, Tom collapsed into a chair. "How can we avoid disaster if we're already fighting with each other?" He covered his face with his hands for a minute, then looked at her. "There's something you better think about, Cease. After what we just told those cops, we're going to have to continue living together until this is all over." His face took on a stern expression. "But I promise you, we will sleep in separate bedrooms and my door will be locked at night." Harry and Tess. Harry hung up and turned to Tess with a smile on his face. "He'll be here in half an hour," and I could tell he wasn't happy. He sounded like a man going to the gallows. Tess looked at her partner thoughtfully. "Let's try something different. Let me interrogate the husband, and you interrogate the wife." "Why do you want to switch places? Our old method always worked." "Call it intuition, but I think Mr. Maddox has more to say in response to a softer approach." Harry rolled his eyes. "You and your crazy intuitions. Okay, let's try it and see what happens." When Tom arrived at the station, Tess led him into one of the interrogation rooms. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Maddox," she said with a sympathetic smile. "I know how stressful this is for you." He nodded to her in gratitude and sat down in the seat she indicated. She knew Harry would have a good view through the one-way mirror. "I want to start with a question about Vincent Madison. What is your opinion of him, Mr. Maddox?" "Well, he seems okay, but I don't know him well enough to say anything." She nodded in understanding. "Based on your limited interactions with him, would you say that he is a reliable person, solid, dependent?" He fidgeted restlessly. "Well, again, I don't know him that well." She interrupted. "Do you trust him, Mr. Maddox?" I, I, I don't know." "You don't know if he can be trusted, but you still let your wife go with him to a conference for a week. It seems strange." He looked like a man fighting an internal battle. Tess decided to change direction. "You mentioned earlier that you and your wife had an argument after the Madisons left your house. What did you quarrel about?" she asked softly. "Well, there were several reasons, and—" "No," she said insistently. "What did you really fight about? Was it because of the convention? Was it because of Vince? To Harry's amazement, tears rolled down Tom's cheeks. Tess was also surprised, but suppressed her reaction. Softly, she asked, "Tom, did Cecily and Vince have an affair?" The upset man put his head in his hands and began to cry. Tess moved closer and put her arm around his shoulders, trying to comfort him. When he finally managed to control himself, she handed him a box of tissues. "It's okay to cry, Tom. I know how painful it is when you are betrayed. Why don't you tell me about it? It will make you feel better if you speak up." He looked at her with reddened eyes. "Can we keep this a secret, detective?" he asked anxiously. "It would kill me if people who know me found out about this." She nodded sympathetically. "We will try to avoid unnecessary disclosure." And with those words, Tom tearfully told the whole story of how he discovered Cecily's affair, the private investigator's report, the disturbing meeting with Rachel, and then the climactic showdown in the Maddox's living room. When he finished, he looked exhausted, but still looked at Tess with concern. "You have to keep this a secret. If the people who know me, the people I work with, find out, they will make my life hell. My reputation will be destroyed. I will have to leave the city." His excessive concern for his reputation seemed strange to Tess, so she tried to find out more from him. "I know what you mean, Tom. People can be so cruel." "You don't know the half," he said bitterly. "Some of the guys I work with are like wild animals. As soon as they smell blood, they will be on you until there is nothing left of you. It's horrible." It seems that for him his good name is more important than his wife's betrayal, she thought. After Tom left, Harry entered the interrogation room with a strange look on his face. "How did you know this guy's wife was cheating?" he demanded. "I was shocked when you said that and almost shit myself when it came together like a bad poker hand." She smiled smugly. "You see, my guess turned out to be correct. A little compassion and a little inspiration was all it took." He looked at her. "You think you're so smart, but you're missing one thing. You could have revealed what was really going on, but all you really did was give us another suspect." "Wait a minute," Tess objected. "You're not." "Think about it," he said. "This guy is willing to do anything to save his reputation. And he just told you how the Madison woman threatened to ruin it. Sounds like a pretty strong motive," he chuckled. "Son of a bitch," Tess swore. "Cecily." When Tom returned home, Cecily looked at him and her face filled with anger. "You told them everything, didn't you?" she accused. He didn't look at her. "They already knew it didn't matter what I said. The only good news is that the female detective promised that they would keep everything as secret as possible." Cecily shook her head. "Idiot, to the extent possible, means they can do whatever they want." With these words, she ran into the bedroom and locked the door behind her. Taking her cell phone, she quickly called Vince. When he answered, she quickly said, "The police know everything. They detained Tom at the station, and he spilled everything. If the school board finds out, you and I will be in big trouble." Before Vince could respond, Cecily saw another call coming in. "Damn, now the police are calling me. I need to answer, Vince." Harry and Tess. Tess took the observation position while Harry escorted Cecily Maddox into the interrogation room. She noticed the stern expression on Harry's face. "Mrs. Maddox, your husband's account of what happened last week is very different from what you told us at home." Cecily looked at him with pleading eyes. "Detective Bridgewater, my marriage is in a very delicate state right now. Of course, you understand why I didn't want to air our dirty laundry in public." Harry ignored her plea for sympathy. "I know how your husband feels about the week you spent with Mr. Madison," he said, "but I would like to hear more about Mrs. Madison's reaction. It seems to me that something more than an ordinary marital quarrel happened in your living room." Cecily shuddered. "God, it was terrible. I've never seen Rachel like this. I've never seen anyone like this. She was wild, frantic, almost out of her mind." "What did she tell you?" asked Harry. "She called me very dirty names. Maybe I deserve them," Cecily said with shame. Did she give you this bruise that you're trying to hide with makeup? Harry asked, pointing to Cecily's cheek. Cecily's eyes flashed with anger. She attacked me. She attacked me without warning and knocked me down. I was so angry that I wanted to kill her. Then she gasped and froze, realizing what she had said. She threatened you, didn't she? Harry pushed. Yes, Cecily admitted reluctantly. She said she would ruin both me and Vince, that we would never work in education again. What did you think of her threats? He asked. Was she serious? You should have seen her, detective. She would have destroyed the three of us on the spot if she could. In a quiet voice, Harry asked, Do you have a gun, Mrs. Maddox? Yes, there is, she admitted miserably. Then she looked at him pleadingly. But it was only for protection. My father gave it to me many years ago. Harry continued even more quietly. Did you kill Rachel Madison, Cecily? The woman's face became distorted, and she began to cry. No, I didn't kill her. I could never do something like that. Do you still have the gun, Mrs. Maddox? He asked. Of course, she said. I keep it in my nightstand, like I told you. We'd like to escort you home and pick it up to see if it's been recently used, just to be sure. Okay, she said resignedly. Tess quickly joined Harry in the car. As they followed Cecily, Tess nodded at him with a small smile on her face. Well, Harry, you managed to break through her armor. Of course, you also provided us with a third suspect. Harry rolled his eyes. Volume. Tom was stunned when he heard the key in the front door. As he walked into the hallway, he saw Cecily enter, followed by two detectives. Now what? He thought with alarm. But Cecily ignored him, and she and the detectives went into the bedroom, Tom following them. Beside their bed, Cecily pointed to her nightstand and said, He's there. The male detective quickly said, Don't touch it, give it to me. He put on a latex glove and carefully opened the nightstand drawer. He then turned around with an accusing look on his face. He's not there. Cecily almost pushed him aside as she hurried over to the nightstand. Then she turned sharply to Tom. Did you take my gun? She demanded. No, what are you talking about? I never touch your things. Cecily turned back to the detectives. I know he was right here, she said. It was stolen. Detectives began asking Cecily many questions about what type of gun she had, when it was last used, and when she last saw it. While they were doing this, Tom went into the office. They think Cecily killed Rachel, he said to himself in amazement. Harry and Tess. Tess was washing the dishes when the doorbell rang. She went into the other room to let Harry in. You're late, she said. Yeah, sorry about that. I was catching up on paperwork. I ate a sandwich at the table. She went to the kitchen and returned with 2 bottles of beer, one of which she handed to Harry, and the other she began to sip as she sat down on the sofa. What do you think about this crazy business? She asked. Harry took a long sip and shook his head. I still think my husband did it, but I'm not as sure as I was before. He rubbed his eyes. That woman Rachel must have been something special. Tess nodded. Yes, I understand what you mean. You couldn't blame her for being upset with her husband and Cecily, but the way she acted when they got home was too much. This woman definitely had problems. Okay, let's try to figure it out. We now have 3 suspects, so let's take them one at a time. Harry raised his index finger. Her husband's motive is obvious. Rachel would probably ruin him in a divorce, and if she caused a scandal on the school board, Vince would be fired in an instant. He obviously had a strong incentive to prevent it. He added a second finger. Similarly, Cecily Maddox was in the same boat. Her career was just as vulnerable as Vince's. And she might have another motive, Tess added. If I'm not mistaken, she's in love with Madison. If I'm right, she might feel a desire to protect not only herself, but also her lover. And she had a gun, and she knew how to use it, Harry added. Isn't it strange that he disappeared just in time? His voice was full of sarcasm. But the fact is, whoever killed Rachel had more on his mind than just self-preservation. Rachel was shot several times, including once in the pelvis. In my opinion, this indicates a crime of passion, Tess noted. Yes, but both Vince and Cecily had a reason to hate Rachel with rage. After she hit Cecily and kicked Vince, both were probably feeling pretty vindictive. He raised a third finger. Anyway, that leaves us with Tom Maddox, poor husband. In some strange way, I think he might have had a stronger motive than the other two. I have never seen a person so worried about what others think of him, and Rachel has made it clear that she plans to humiliate him as much as possible. Yes, Tess agreed. Listening to him during interrogation, it seemed that he was ready to do anything to save face. Harry finished his beer, then looked at Tess with a sly expression on his face. "Do you know what the most dangerous animal in the world is?" he asked her. She looked at him questioningly. "This is the one that is backed into a corner. You never know what it's going to do." Tess nodded. "The problem is that I think Rachel has all three of them cornered at the same time. We still don't know which of them attacked her." They sat in silence for several minutes. Then Tess took off her shoes and stretched out on the sofa. "Be a good guy and massage my feet, Harry." He sighed theatrically and walked over to take her legs in his hands. As he began to massage them, Tess purred, "It feels so good, Harry. You have no idea." After a few minutes, he stopped. "It's enough?" She looked at him angrily. "Your arms haven't fallen off yet." He snorted and continued the massage. After a while, his hands rose from her legs to her shins and calves. "That's nice too, Harry." He worked higher up, massaging her thighs. She lifted her skirt higher to give him access. "That's even better," she sighed. "That was so good, Harry," she murmured into his ear after a few minutes. They lay there together for a long time until Tess pushed him a little. "Okay, get up before you crush me, you big monkey. I really think you've gained weight." When she returned in her dressing gown, Harry was still lying on the sofa. "Come on, Harry, it's time to get up." "Can I stay the night, Tess? Just this once?" "You know better. If someone from the precinct drives by and sees both of our cars here, we'll never hear the end of it, and we certainly won't be allowed to work together anymore." Okay, stop grumbling. I will leave, but this is a royal pain." Appeared on her face with a sly smile. "You shouldn't go back if it's that hard, Harry." "As if you could go long without me, you passionate witch," he said, putting on his clothes. When they arrived at the station the next morning, the desk sergeant gave them a surprise. "Looks like we found the murder weapon last night." A garbage company truck was picking up a container at a construction site. As they were lifting the container, the load shifted, and the gun that was thrown inside somehow went off. The bullet ricocheted inside the container, scaring the driver half to death. Anyway, when they brought the container to the landfill, someone went inside and found a Glock. Ballistics is testing it now. And here's the interesting thing. The container was only 2 blocks from the Madison's house. While the two detectives were talking, a man in a white lab coat approached them, waving a piece of paper. "Hey, you two, we have a match. We need to do another test to confirm the results, but I'll bet you dollars to donuts that this is the gun that killed the woman in your case." "Are there fingerprints on it?" Harry asked quickly. "No luck," said the technician. "Between all the dust and debris in the container and the prints of the guy who found it, we couldn't get anything." The detectives headed to their desks and sat down to discuss this latest development. "Well, what do you think of your bet now, Harry?" Tess asked. This points directly to Cecily Maddox. "Not necessarily," Harry countered. "It is entirely possible that her husband could have taken the gun. This would give him both a means to commit a crime and a good alibi." A thoughtful expression appeared on Tess's face. "If you think about it, since we don't know how long the gun was missing, anyone who visited their home like Vince Madison could have taken it. Everyone knew Cecily had a gun. The fact is, it doesn't bring us any closer to the killer." Harry frowned. "We have 3 suspects, and they all had strong reasons for wanting to silence Rachel Madison. We now have the murder weapon, but any one of them could have accessed it. This business is like trying to catch an apple with your teeth. Every time you get close, it eludes you. Tess laughed. When was the last time you tried to catch an apple with your teeth, old man? You know, he said, like Halloween as a kid. It was. He saw that she was still laughing and stopped. Stupid, he muttered in disgust. They were filling out the seemingly endless paperwork required for each case when the precinct captain approached them with a frown on his face. "How's the investigation into Madison's murder going?" he asked. "They are pushing me hard to make an arrest." Tess and Harry exchanged quick glances, and Tess stood up. She always dealt better with her bosses than Harry. "We believe we are close to a solution, Captain. We have 3 good suspects. Now we need to narrow it down to 1, she told him. His answer did not please her. "Detective Mosley, we have a government employee shot dead on her doorstep in the middle of the night. A lot of people are concerned and want answers. I can't go to the media and say we have 3 suspects, can I? There must be something more, and I expect you two to find it and fast." With that, he walked away, and Harry turned to his partner in disappointment. "What does he want us to do? Beat up those 3 until one of them confesses?" Tess was also at a loss. "What are we missing? What did we not notice?" Harry dropped his pen and stood up. "Well, I know one thing. Filling out a bunch of forms won't bring us any closer to the truth." He looked at Tess. "Come on, let's go to the prison and try to find out something about Rachel Madison." "How will this help narrow down the suspects, Harry? It seems like a waste of time," Tess complained. "Maybe," said Harry, "but do you have a better offer?" On the way to the Western Correctional Center, Tess looked at Harry doubtfully. "I still think it's a waste of time. Sure, Rachel was the head nurse there, but what does that have to do with this case?" "No idea," said Harry, "but it's the only route I can think of that we haven't explored yet. What harm can this do to us?" She was silent for the rest of the ride, but she seemed unhappy. When they arrived at the prison administration building, several prisoners were practicing outside. When they saw Tess, some of them began to whistle and shout, but she ignored them. One of the men stared at Harry. "Hey, I know you," he said. "You're the cop who put me here." "Hey, Jimmy, it's nice to have you inside while I'm outside," Harry replied good-naturedly. "Go to hell," the prisoner said, giving the detective the middle finger. Harry just grinned. Inside, things were much more orderly, and the 2 detectives were ushered into the chief's office. When Harry asked him about Rachel, the boss shook his head sadly. "What a tragedy. She was a good employee and an excellent nurse. We are still in shock over her death. You know, when she first came here, I thought we might have problems because of her appearance." He turned to Tess. "You have seen how young prisoners react to a beautiful woman. But Nurse Madison didn't let them indulge in anything, and most of them treated her with respect. I don't know how she did it, but they always behaved decently with her." "Is there anyone who worked with Nurse Madison on a regular basis that she could trust?" asked Harry. Tess rolled her eyes at this new question, but Harry ignored her as the boss directed them to one of the guards, Ray Hudson. Ray worked with her often. He was her unofficial assistant, the chief said. As they walked towards the security post, Tess grabbed Harry's hand. "This doesn't help, Harry. Let's go back to the station." But Harry stubbornly moved on, and, sighing, Tess followed him. Ray Hudson was only slightly older than the prisoners he guarded. The young man had only good things to say about the nurse, and it was obvious that her death had deeply affected him. "He even has tears in his eyes," Tess thought. "I'm sure he had a crush on her." Hudson repeated what the warden had told them. Most of the inmates seemed to like and respect the nurse. "They should," he said. "She took better care of them than they deserved." "You said that most of the prisoners treated her with respect. Were there those who were not so polite?" asked Harry. "Well," said the guard, "there were a few that really seemed to hate her. They never did or said anything to her, but I saw them every day and could understand it. There was one guy, Hispanic. I don't know why, but he just seemed to hate her. Every time he saw her, he glared at her." This has always bothered me, but Nurse Smithson wasn't worried at all. I don't think he or anyone who didn't love her ran away recently, Harry said jokingly. No, the guard said, but this Latino was only released a couple of days ago. Harry glanced quickly at Tess and then asked, Do you remember the prisoner's name? Of course, Hudson said. His name was Hector Hernandez. While Harry started the car, Tess called the probation office to find out which officer was assigned to Hector Hernandez. Her call was transferred, and she was able to contact the correct officer. After a few minutes, Tess hung up and looked at Harry. Very interesting. Hector did not register with his probation officer after his release. Technically, he is already violating the conditions of his release. Great, Harry said with disappointment. So how do we find him? Well, for starters, I have his mother's address. Let's go there. When they knocked on the door at the address, the woman answered. The years had clearly not been kind to her, so much so that Tess wasn't sure if it was his mother or grandmother. Mrs. Hernandez, we are the police. We'd like to talk to Hector. To their surprise, the woman burst into tears. I knew he was in trouble again. He hides in the basement and does not come out under any pretext. He just lies there and moans that he's dying. Harry and Tess exchanged glances. Tess asked, Can we come in, Mrs. Hernandez? We just want to talk to him. She looked at the two detectives hopelessly, then shrugged and invited them inside. You can try. I can't do anything with him. Just don't hurt him, she begged. He's my youngest, my Nino. She showed them a door behind, which were steps leading down to the basement. Harry looked at Tess and clearly put his hand on the gun. Tess nodded and did the same. Together, they quietly went down to the basement, which smelled of mold, dirt, and other things Tess didn't want to think about. A faint light shone through the dirty basement windows, and in the semi-darkness, they made out a figure curled up on a cot. Hector, Harry called. Hector Hernandez. It's the police, Hector. We just want to talk to you. Frightened, Hector tried to jump out of the bed, but when he saw the detectives, he groaned and felt powerless again. Realizing that he would not resist, Tess quickly approached him and checked to see if he had a weapon. Finding nothing, she glanced at Harry and pointed questioningly at the handcuffs, but he shook his head. What happened, Hector? What's wrong? He asked in an almost friendly voice. The young man looked up, and they saw tears running down his cheeks. She killed me. She injected me with poison and said she wouldn't give me the antidote unless I did what she wanted. You don't understand, I had to do it. And then she lied to me there was no antidote. Now I'm going to die, he said pitifully. I don't understand, Hector. What did she make you do? Harry asked, frowning. Hector looked at them. She made me kill her, he said, and began to cry. The guard at the prison told us you hated her, Tess said. Is that why you shot her? No, Hector groaned. She made me do terrible things, things that no man should do. I hated her for it, but I didn't want to kill her. I just wanted to get away from there, get away from her. But she wouldn't let me leave, and now she's killed me. They took him to the police station and interrogated him for a long time. He was offered a lawyer, but he refused. I'm going to die anyway, what's that to me? After a while, Tess came out and went straight to the captain. That's the wildest thing I've ever heard, she told him. According to Hector, Rachel Madison controlled the prisoners with carrots and sticks. She offered illegal substances to some. She threatened to kill others through medical manipulation. The captain looked puzzled. According to Hector, her favorite tactic was to threaten to inject them with poison during vaccinations or other procedures, Tess explained. In Hector's case, he needed to receive daily insulin injections from her. This gave her a powerful means of pressure. She told him that she could give him a lethal dose at any time if he did not cooperate. So, on the day Hector was due to be released, after Rachel gave him an injection, she told him that this time she had added a slow-acting poison that would kill him in a week. She said that if he did what she wanted, she would give him the antidote. Otherwise, he will die a painful death. And what she wanted him to do was kill her. The captain asked with disbelief. Why did she need this? Tess shook her head. Here we can only guess. Judging by her husband's words, Rachel experienced a very difficult childhood. When her father ran away with another woman, Rachel's mother committed suicide and her sister became mentally ill. When Rachel learned that her husband was going to leave her for Cecily Maddox, she became convinced that she, too, would go crazy. She chose death over madness. So Hector came to her house, and when she opened the door, he shot. He then searched her purse, where she said the antidote was supposed to be, but he wasn't there, so we think he fired the remaining bullets into her body. The captain still didn't believe it. But if she wanted to die, why didn't she just kill herself? Why did she start this complex intrigue to force Hector to kill her? Harry and I think she wanted revenge on all three of whom she thought were responsible. Think about it. If she killed herself, everyone would write it off as a tragedy. Any accusations against Vince, Cecily, and Tom would probably be dismissed as the delusions of a deeply depressed woman. But by arranging it this way, she created a situation in which all three of them looked guilty as hell. She believed that the murder investigation would turn into a circus that would destroy all three. The captain looked at her thoughtfully. I understand what you're saying, but I don't think there's any way in the world the jury will believe it. This sounds too crazy, and the only proof you have is the ravings of the convicted person. And by the way, where is Hector now? Tess shook her head in disgust. The doctor is examining him now. It's really sad, Captain. As far as the doctor has been able to determine at this point, there is absolutely nothing wrong with him. He believes that there was no poison at all. I think this was her last revenge on the boy. The captain looked at her sternly. Incredible. Well, that's too bad, but under the current circumstances, unless you find something else, the prosecutor is going to charge this guy with first-degree murder. But Captain, she began, but he waved his hand, cutting her off. When Tess returned to her desk, Harry had just returned from the interrogation room. She walked over and stood in front of him with her arms crossed. What? He asked. Don't sit like a log, let's go. We will not allow this stupid boy to be hanged for what this crazy woman did to him, she said angrily. So where are we going? He asked, confused. Back to prison, she said. He looked at her strangely. What do you hope to find there? He asked. I know it when I see it, she said decisively. This time the prison yard was empty. When they were let in, the warden was surprised to see them again so soon. Is there anything else I can help you detectives with? He asked politely. Harry had no idea, so he stared at Tess. We'd like to take a look at the nurse's office where Madison worked, she said. I think this can be arranged. Just don't touch anything. The infirmary wasn't very big, just a rectangular room with an examination table and a couple of chairs and a small, locked refrigerator for medicine. There was a nurse's desk in the corner, and on the wall behind it hung a medicine cabinet with a mirror. There was a file cabinet in the other corner, next to a door that probably led to a storage room. Both closets and the pantry were also locked. Should I call someone to open this? Harry asked, pointing to the locks. Tess shook her head. She wouldn't leave anything there. That's the first place someone would look. Instead, she opened the desk and quickly flipped through its contents. Then she knelt down and carefully felt for hidden drawers or false bottoms. When that didn't work, she stood up, turned to the medicine cabinet, and opened it. She noticed several over-the-counter medications, some Band-Aids, and, interestingly, some cosmetics. Tess looked at the latter with curiosity. Quite provocatively, she assessed. I would have thought she would go for a more sophisticated look. She closed the medicine cabinet and looked around. She then walked around the room, pressing her fingers on the walls. Frustrated, she turned to Harry, who was watching her with a slight grin. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. When you're looking for drugs or other illegal substances in someone's house, Harry, where do you look first? He looked puzzled, but gave her the answer she was expecting. You look in the bedroom first. Criminals usually like to keep their stash close by. Exactly, Tess said with a small smile on her face. She walked over to the table and turned to the medicine cabinet. Grabbing both sides of the cabinet, she began to pull. "Hey, what are you doing?" Harry exclaimed in alarm. "Don't ruin the place." Tess ignored him and pulled again. With that, the entire medicine cabinet slid out from the wall, revealing a shallow niche behind it. Tess looked inside. "Oh my God, Harry," she whispered. "Come look at this." Inside was a range of illegal substances and paraphernalia, neatly arranged on shallow shelves. She pointed to a rectangular metal mold mounted on the back wall of the medicine cabinet. "What is this?" asked Harry. Tess carefully removed the rectangle and opened the lid to reveal a tablet computer. "If I'm not mistaken," she said excitedly, "this is Rachel Madison's diary." The two detectives sat down at the table eagerly. Tess installed the tablet and began to turn it on. When it loaded, they saw folder after folder, each labeled with a different date. Curious, Tess opened one of the earliest ones and then clicked on the file inside. They were stunned when Rachel's face suddenly filled the screen. They saw a nurse talking about her work and her patients. Nothing remarkable. Tess paused the playback and moved to a later date. This time Rachel appeared again, but her demeanor had changed and her tone was angry. "I will not tolerate such insolence from these boys," she said. "They'll have to show me a little respect." Then a strange smile appeared on her face. "And I think I know how to get them to do what I want." Tess tried another file, and this time Rachel seemed to be making a verbal comment to herself. "Joe was very happy when I gave him the drugs today. It's a shame I can't be a fly on the wall in his cell tonight to see what happens," she giggled. Tess was about to try another file, but Harry stopped her. "Find a more recent one," he demanded. When she clicked on one of the files dated this year, a completely different video appeared. The tablet must have been set up on a table and pointed at the examination table. The young man was lying face down on the table, bent at the waist, his legs dangling to the floor. When the figure raised its head, both detectives gasped. His face was made up to look like a girl, with bright red lips, dark eyeshadow, and powdered cheeks. Suddenly, Rachel Madison walked into the frame. She was wearing a leather harness that left her chest exposed. But what really caught Tess's attention was the large sex toy attached to her belt. Moving closer, she reached out to caress the young man's bare ass. He twitched noticeably. "Come on, you know you want it," she said seductively. "No, please don't, Nurse Madison. Please don't force me to do this." "I'll be good, I'll do anything," the man begged, and Harry gasped. "This is the voice of Hector Hernandez." Rachel's voice turned icy. "If you don't stand still and cooperate, Hector, you know what will happen. Your next insulin shot will be your last, I promise." The frightened boy fell limply onto the examination table. "I can't watch this," Harry said, suddenly stopping the video. Tess also had a sick look on her face, but she continued to check the files. "I'm looking for the one from last week," she told Harry. He nodded and watched. "It's last Monday," Tess exclaimed, and when she clicked on the file, they saw the living room. "It looks like the Madison house," Harry whispered. They expected to see Rachel, but they were both stunned when she suddenly appeared in the frame. Her face was wild, her eyes darted in different directions. She started screaming at the camera, and Tess hurried to turn down the volume. The woman was furious, almost insane. "I knew that something similar would happen to me, as it happened to my mother, as it happened to Megan. That son of a bitch is going to leave me. Oh God, I can't like Megan, I can't stand it. I'm going to kill myself before I let that happen. But I can't let this loving husband and that bitch Cecily Maddox get away with it. They must be punished for their sins, just like Cecily's useless husband. He had to stop them before anything happened. I know I'm going crazy. I feel like my mind is slipping away. I won't live like this. I can't. But I think there's a way to pay them back before I'm done. They will suffer for my murder. I can use the Hernandez boy to help me. I know he hates me. He will be happy to kill me. And if I do everything right, the blame will fall on these three, then they will suffer. I will make Hector suffer too, he deserves it." The file suddenly ended, and a shocked Tess quickly opened the last one. Surprisingly, Rachel seemed calmer this time. All is ready. You should have seen the hatred on Hector's face this morning. I thought he would kill me on the spot. But I warned him that if he did this, he would never find the antidote, and he gave up again, like always. Now all we have to do is wait. A strange expression appeared on her face. I gave him Cecily's gun. It was easy to steal. That stupid hubby didn't even lock the side door of the house when he left for work yesterday. Now all the details are in place. All that remains is to wait for Cecily and Vince to return. They'll probably go to Cecily's house first. I'll go there and wait for them. Then everything will be almost ready. Suddenly, a distressed expression appeared on Rachel's face, and her voice changed. Mom, I will see you soon. I don't know exactly when. I don't want to know, but then it will all be over, and we will never be apart again. I miss you so much, Mom. I've missed you for so long. Detectives had to wait for the crime scene team to finish at the aid station before they could leave. On the way home, they were both silent most of the way. Finally, Harry looked at his partner. You know, the most ironic thing about all of this is that Rachel was deathly afraid all her life that she would go crazy like her sister Megan. But the truth is that she was already mad, she just didn't know it. Harry and Tess. 2 weeks later, Tess was just finishing her makeup when the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, Harry stood on the threshold in his best suit and with a bouquet of flowers. "Oh, how sweet, Harry," Tess exclaimed. "You didn't have to do that." "Never say that Harry Bridgewater doesn't pay his debts," he said grandly. "I owe you dinner, and damn, it's going to be good." "Actually," she said, "I feel a little guilty about it. If you hadn't gotten me into jail, we would never have solved this case." "Maybe not," said Harry, "but if you hadn't found that hidden compartment behind the mirror, no one would have believed us. Anyway, my husband didn't do it, so I'm crying. Now stop talking and let's go before we lose our place." Harry made reservations at the best restaurant he could afford, and the two detectives enjoyed a delicious dinner accompanied by decent wine. They chatted a little about the gossip at the station, but then Tess's face turned serious. "I wanted to tell you, Cecily Maddox called me. She wanted to make sure she was allowed to leave the city." Harry looked at her curiously. "Where is she going?" "She goes to her parents to start her life again. She resigned from her teaching position here, and she and Tom are getting a divorce." "Is Vince going with her?" he asked. "No. After everything they had caused, she said she felt too guilty to stay with him. She told me he had also quit and was moving out west to start over. The full story about him and Cecily never came out, but there was enough speculation that he decided it was best to quit before he was asked to leave." "So what will happen to Tom now?" "He left town 3 days ago, and Cecily hasn't heard anything about him. I think the rumors and gossip have become unbearable for him." Harry shook his head. "You know, even though we solved the case, in a way, Rachel still got her revenge. Her plan didn't work out the way she wanted, but the lives of all three were greatly affected." Then his face lit up. "Have you heard about Hector?" "No, what's wrong with him?" Harry grinned. "The prosecutor's office doesn't know what to do with his case. The first-degree murder charge was dropped after Rachel's video diary was seen. Now they're not sure if they can even get a manslaughter conviction." He laughed. "Before it's all over, the only charge he may face is 4 counts of shooting within city limits." "Okay," Tess said. "I really feel sorry for the boy. He is not a model citizen, but he did not deserve the way he was treated." Harry nodded. He then noticed her empty plate and asked, "Hey, do you want dessert? They say there is a tiramisu here that you could die from." She looked at him like a mother reproaching a disobedient child. "You need to watch your calories, Harry. I told you about this before." He looked at her with irritation. "Why do you always have to point out my weight?" "Because if something happens to you, where will I find someone who will tolerate a bossy lady like me?" she said with a sly smile. Harry chuckled, but after a moment a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. "You know, this case really affected me. A strange thing. All four lived like leaves caught in a stream. They simply went with the flow, letting life take them wherever it wanted. And then one day they found themselves on the shore in a place they didn't like, and they didn't even understand how it happened. Tess looked at Harry sharply. "You're not usually such a philosopher, Harry. Everything is fine." "You don't agree with me?" he asked. "No, no, I know what you mean," she said, not at all sure she understood. "The thing is, you and I are doing the same thing, Tess, just going with the flow, letting life take us wherever it wants," he said thoughtfully. Tess was alarmed. "Are you sure you're okay, Harry? Don't you have cancer or anything?" He shook his head in exasperation. "No, no, nothing like that. I just don't want to go with the flow all my life, you know." With these words, he stood up and knelt awkwardly in front of her chair. "Harry," she exclaimed, "what are you doing?" "You stupid woman, I'm trying to propose to you." As she stared at him in amazement, he reached into his pocket and clumsily pulled out a small box, which he opened to reveal a small diamond ring. "It's not much, but I hope it will do," he said. Tess stared at him for a moment. Then she slid down from the chair and, struggling with her dress, knelt down in front of him. "If you're going to kneel, Harry Bridgewater, then I'll stoop to your level," she said firmly. "And yes, I swear to heaven, I will marry you." With that, she grabbed his face and kissed him, and the rest of the restaurant's customers burst into applause and screams. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.